Okay, we're going to look at some beef ribs now. So you can buy these from your local butcher. They come with quite a bit of fat on, so you might want to trim a little bit of the fat off. The other thing is there's a membrane on here, so it's best to take that membrane off before you do your barbecuing. So yeah, I'll just trim a little bit of the fat off. So you want a nice sharp knife to do this. Yeah, just taking the big chunks of fat off. I mean, a lot of that fat will cook in the barbecue, but if you've got too big a chunk, it won't melt in there. So we'll just take off a lot of the big chunks here. With the membrane on the back, I've got a tip there for you, and that's to use an end of a spoon. I've been told that's the best way to get a membrane off. It is a very tricky thing to do, so I would it will take time to get that membrane off. So you probably want to do this probably the day before you're going to barbecue. You want to put a marinade, a rub on your ribs anyway for a good 8 to 12 hours. So what I'll do is I'm going to trim off of the fat, then I'm going to put the rub on and leave it overnight and cook these ribs tomorrow. Is to use the back of a spoon. So so I've taken the fat off the ribs and the membrane off the back there. Now I'm just gonna make a little dry rub for it and get that marinating for 24 hours or so. So for the rub, I've got about 2 tablespoons of salt, and that's just regular salt plus a bit of celery salt. Then I've got 1 tablespoon of paprika, 2 tablespoons of brown sugar, a tablespoon of oregano, and a tablespoon of chili powder, and a tablespoon of cumin. So I'm just going to put them all together, mix that up nicely. And there we are. So this is just a nice, easy, dry rub, but we'll go into rubs a bit later on in a different episode. But I'm just making a nice, easy, dry rub just to put on the meat. Leave it for 24 hours in the fridge, and then I'll come to cooking the ribs tomorrow. So just make sure this is all ground up nicely, mixed up. Alright, once you're happy with it, I'm just going to smother this in that dry rub. Try and get in all those nooks and crannies. You know, you're wanting to flavor that meat as best as you can. Alright, and when you're happy, you know, you can give it a really mess around with it. Make sure you're covering everything in it nicely. And then I'm just going to cover that with a bit of cling film and leave that in the fridge. So I'm just waiting for the coals to glow white or red-white color. So that'll probably take between 15 minutes to 20 minutes, depending on the amount of coals you got in there. So because I've only filled it halfway, it might be just 15 minutes or so. So just go grab yourself a nice cold beer, come back, and then once it's looking like those coals are glowing, what you do is then you just pour those coals out on one side of the barbecue. That's important because what we're doing now is we're doing low and slow. We're not doing direct cooking at the moment. We're just going to do indirect cooking. This is a larger cut of meat that I'm going to cook. So I'm going to want to put the coals on one side of the barbecue, putting the meat on the opposite side. We'll close the lid. It'll smoke, it'll trap all that smoke and flavor into the meat. That's what we're trying to do. And then we're going to go for a long period of time, cooking the meat on a lower temperature for a longer period of time. So what I'm going to be cooking today is ribs, beef ribs. So we've put the rub on them the previous day, and then we're going to pop that in the barbecue on the opposite side of the coals, put the lid on, and we're cooking for roughly 4 hours at around 140, 130 degrees Celsius for roughly 4 hours there. So I've just come to check on the ribs. So they're looking very well at the moment. The temperature was sitting around 150 degrees, so it's okay. Maybe a little bit too hot, but I can try and turn that down a little bit by closing the vent a little bit more. But I'm also just keeping an eye on the coals, making sure they haven't gone out, and checking if they need to be topped up. Okay. So yeah, that's looking good. So I'm just going to return the lid back on. And it's sitting around 150, so I might just close the vent there a little bit, and we're just reducing the oxygen in there and therefore lowering the temperature a little bit. Okay, so I'm just going to have a look, keep an eye on the ribs here. So the temperature in there is still about 150, so I'm pretty happy with that. It's a good temperature for cooking the ribs there, and we'll just have a nosy. So yeah, I think those ribs are looking pretty good so far. Let's just turn them over. Look, yeah, they're starting to brown up nicely, and you can see the meat's just starting to fall away from the bone there. So I've probably got another hour of cooking there, and then what I'm going to do is make a wet marinade to go on that, a glaze. And then I'll probably wrap up those ribs in a bit of tin foil and leave them to rest for a little while before cutting them up and serving. Just to keep the coals going. So if you want to top up the coals, easy enough to do here. You can see that there's two little flaps on this Weber here, which is pretty handy for just topping up and putting more coals in there. And what I'm going to add to the barbecue here is just a couple of sweet corn on the cob here. I've just wrapped them in tin foil, put a little bit of butter in there, salt, pepper, and paprika, smoked paprika in there. So just going to add them into the barbecue here. Just something else to go with the ribs there. So you can put them on the bottom shelf or the top shelf, either way, but it's not going to affect it anyway. So I'm just going to leave them there cooking. They'll probably take about an hour to cook the sweet corn as well. So now that the ribs are just about cooked, I'm just going to take them out of the barbecue now. And then I'm going to wrap them up in some tin foil and add just a little bit of a sauce here, a little glaze here, just to help keep the moisture in there. And then I'm going to fold up the ribs and put it back in the barbecue for another hour or so, just for the last hour. So I'm just going to get the ribs off the barbecue. As you can see, the meat is coming away from the bone quite nicely, showing it's pretty much cooked there. I'm just going to wrap them now and try to retain the moisture as much as possible. So I've got a liquid glaze here to add in here. So I'm just going to turn the ribs back so that they're face down. This is the side I want them in, the barbecue. Then I'm just going to give it a little bit of a glaze here on the top. That moisture is going to come down and sink to the bottom of the tin foil, like so. The glaze is made up of brown sugar, about 1.5 cups or about a cup there of brown sugar, and some beer, about 3 tablespoons of beer, 3 tablespoons of white wine vinegar, and just a bit of salt and pepper in there, and some chili flakes. Hold this up here nicely. So I'm going to try to make a package in here so it's all sealed up like so we're not losing any liquid. Okay, so that's the ribs been cooking for roughly 4 hours. That was 3 hours uncovered, just on the grill, on indirect cooking. Then I covered it with the tin foil and I cooked it for a further hour. So I'm just going to take it off the barbecue now, and then I'm just going to let it sit outside, room temperature, just for another 40 minutes or so, and then cut and serve. Okay, when you're finished your barbecue, always close your lid, and you're closing the vents top and bottom. Just going to show you the final product there. So basically, let's show you the ribs. Okay. So I'll want to save those juices and pour them over the ribs once they're finished here. So this was the sweet corn I made earlier, and that's just paprika, butter, salt, and pepper in there. Okay, there we are. A little bit of coleslaw just to go on the side there. Okay. And then what we've all been waiting for, the ribs. Okay, so just have a rib each. These are half ribs, but you can go the full rib if you want. But I think the half ribs are big enough for one person or so. It's not lovely and moist in there. It's still got lovely good bit of texture in there, but it'll be nice melt in your mouth there. Okay. And there we have lovely barbecue ribs. You'll see there's a nice ring of red. That's where the smoke penetrated. The smoke will only go so far into the meat. Just final thing, just pour some of the juices over the meat. And there you have it. And there we have final product. Lovely ribs, cooked on the barbecue, nice and slow, delicious, melt off the bone.